I'm Adrian Saville.
I'm Binedell.
And we're talking about Southeast Asia, country miracles, the industrial engine that fires up over the course of the last 40 years. In part one of our video series, we spoke about the context, the circumstances that surrounds these economic, industrial, social miracles. In this part two, we want to deep dive into some specific country examples. And then in part three of our series, we'll go and talk about the implications, the so what of this discussion. Nick, when we spoke in part one, we discussed some of the country examples. We singled out a few of them for mention. And I want to put these numbers on the table for you. 3x, 10x, 15x, 300x. Those are the changes in per capita income for particular countries over the course of the last 40 years. The 3x is South Africa. The 10x is Philippines. 15-20x is Vietnam. 300x is Singapore. And our search is for ingredients that explain this trajectory. And you gave the example of your shirt experience in Malaysia. I'll share my dinky car, toy car experience, that when I can read for the first time and I turn a car over, my toy car, it says underneath, made in Japan, made in Hong Kong. My kids 20 years ago, when they turned their cars over, it says made in Vietnam, made in Indonesia. And on my most recent trip to Vietnam, I see Vietnam is making real electric cars called VinFast. What's the common ingredient here? Is it the state? Is it the neighbors? Is it fantastic policy? Is it a work ethic? What is it that describes these country stories?
I think it's very difficult, Adrian, to draw out a single thread and a single bullet, because these countries have such different histories, geographies, cultures, historical colonialism or not.
But let's choose one. Let's start with one that you know particularly well as Singapore.
One country, Singapore. So Singapore, of course, is the 300x.
Yeah.
From $600 per person to $160,000 per person. But it's unique. It's a unique species. It's a city-state on 40 by 20 square kilometers. It was colonized as a port. It got its independence and just began a series of disciplined fiscal and policy investments that led to significant growth. Off the back of the port, did a bit of industrialization, and then education was and then infrastructure, building, housing, and to see that city become, you can think of Dubai, you can think of a few of these, Hong Kong, Dubai, Singapore as an example. Very controlled government. It's democratic, but in a sort of authoritarian way. Very Chinese in its rigorous planning. It is a planned economy with a bit of play. Very big focus on building skills and infrastructure and building very sound institutions. Behind that, underneath all of that, lies Chinese culture of very hard work, of respect, of thinking of the long term, of investing in your family. That's the Singapore story. I strongly believe these stories are incredibly useful to understand in each country or each industry in a country, not as a generalization so much, although the overall performance of Southeast Asia is just fantastic. That's what attracted me to go back to the different countries. But Singapore is at the high end of the 300x, as you mentioned.
But they're not alone. So they're exceptional, but they're not exceptional and alone. We've got Philippines doing 10x. We've got Vietnam doing 20x. So they've got something that is, I would venture, notably different from the South African 3x.
Right. Oh, that's true. And so I think in any country you're analyzing, including ours, you've got to look at three big things. The politics in the state, the economy and business, and civil society. If those have to be in a form of dynamic alignment. They're constantly changing, but there has to be enough coherence for there to be a thing. And in each of these countries I've studied and been to, there's a thing. but they're not always
I
the
love
same
this
thing.
term. So we're in search of a thing.
We're in search of a thing.
Okay.
To say you can't have a formula, but open your eyes at a high level as you enter, start looking at what is the history here? What are the demographics? What is the geographic dynamics? What's the size of the place? What's their core crop? How were they colonized if they were colonized? These are differences between them. The commonality, if you push me, the commonality is human capital. It's energy. Somehow or another in these countries, people know, in most of them, the government's not going to do much for them. Singapore's an exception. Most of these countries, people know if they don't work, they don't eat. But they have community, and the community is connected to the government, and there's a reasonably high degree of compliance with law, not fully. Some of them are pretty corrupt. But there's a social capital that I think is so exciting and interesting. We come from a region where there's no connectedness between our countries, or certainly not enough, low amounts of social trust between countries, lots of impediments to flow of ideas and capital and people. They've had an outward-looking approach generally, not all of them, but mainly an outward-looking approach, and have been able to take the domestic circumstances and parlay them, use them into becoming export countries, attracting foreign investment and generating growth under a degree of fiscal moderation.
Putting on a purely economic hat and thinking about what the ingredients are that have been common to these countries, two items stand out, or two elements stand out. The first, as you're suggesting, is an outward orientation, to use the economic language, export-oriented industrialization. And it's been industrialization rather than services that's led the way. And the second enabler, from a policy perspective, has been building very high levels of gross domestic fixed investment, figures that are significantly above world average. And if we take the broad sweep of time, gross domestic fixed investment for the world economy averages early 20% of GDP. When we go to Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, we find these figures sitting in high 20s and early 30s. These are big balance sheet investments. I was tempted to say bets, but they're not bets. They're very, very deliberate. But for those gross fixed capital formation, for that activity to take place, you have to have the enabling environment. So Vietnam is a great case in point, where their doi moi policy just flips the country. In the early 1980s, they go from inward-looking, very centrally planned, to a market-oriented economy, still centrally controlled, but market orientation and outward-looking. So over the course of the 1980s to now, Vietnam has done 200 times growth in industrial exports.
And of course, that's all under the Communist Party.
Yeah.
So the thing that we forget maybe is, of course, that Vietnam was the Ukraine of its time. There were more bombs dropped on North Vietnam than were used in the Second World War. And from that, it bounced back. Why did it bounce back? Vietnamese culture is a thing. They were invaded by the Chinese 3 times. They always managed to expel them. The French colonized them. They expelled them. The Americans came in and did their thing. They got rid of them. And they have a future-looking culture.
The famous image of the tanks going through the gate.
Right. But the culture, you have to go to a museum. It's called the Remembrances Museum. You know, they've got dog tags and tanks in the museum to see. They don't talk about that. They talk about next.
Yeah.
And this is a fairly common theme, if we're looking for common themes, is a future orientation. Not the past's going to inform the future. What we do today is going to inform the future. This doi moi, this outward-looking orientation is a big feature of Vietnam, for whom I have immense respect. From my first visit there in the late 80s to now, you can just see this was going to happen. It was the culture.
So Nick, let's go back to Singapore, where you make the point about the political arrangement. Here we've got Vietnam, single-party state. Singapore, single-party state.
No, it's not a single-party state. It's quite a strong opposition.
Right. But you've got a party in control.
An authoritarian a sort of a mildly authoritarian state with
Okay.
very strong rules about chewing gum and litter,
Yeah.
which is imposed.
And when we go to neighbors, Philippines, Malaysia?
Looser relationships. The Philippines are thousands of islands, all under Spanish Catholicism.
So I'm scratching around for the
Yeah.
for the political arrangement, because
Political-
surely the state
Oh,
plays a
no.
role here.
It does, but the political arrangements of the Philippines are chaotic. Marcos's son, the great theft, the kleptomaniac who robbed the Philippines blind.
The greatest shoe collection in the world.
His
Imelda
wife.
Marcos, yeah.
Their son is the president.
Yeah.
And Duterte, who's now just been arrested for the execution of so many drug dealers without trial, his daughter was until recently the vice president. So 12 families run the Philippines.
Mm.
They control the politics and the economics. That is not the case in Singapore. Singapore has this Chinese tradition of the state is a thing and the economy is a separate thing. It's controlled in Singapore by the state. In the Philippines, it's not the same.
If we go in search of other aspects then that the state might be able to do. So,
Well, in the Philippines case, a huge investment in education.
okay.
I was shocked to find that primary school hours are 8 to 4 p.m., not to go home at lunchtime when you're 5. It's a full day of study, 6 days a week. So big investments in education. Not very good universities, but improving all the time. There's a level of hope in a place like the Philippines because they can see the progress. Success is a strange thing. It creates other success. There's a linkage that happens. And if there are jobs and you can move to the cities and, the families still stay in the small village, but the country, like China, is progressing, then you get a certain energy that begins to compound itself over time.
You're making reference in a couple of places to sort of the level of activity and determination. In my recent visit to Ho Chi Minh, I was struck by a close to midnight experience where, in good economic nerd style, walking around the city, I'd gone in search of potholes, seeing if I could
find one.
mirror my Johannesburg experience.
Right.
And I happened to be in Ho Chi Minh in December, again by coincidence in January, back to back the better part of 2 weeks in the city. I can't find potholes. I can't find water leaks. I can't find a traffic light that's out of order. And at a pavement cafe close to midnight, I'm making my way back to my hotel. I stop for a refreshment and a garbage truck goes past half an hour before midnight. And the determination, the purpose, the commitment, the streets are being swept clean a few strokes before midnight. Is this a thing?
It's a huge thing. This is you see, we have two ways of looking at it. The Chinese is a top-down way of the law. You will obey the law. This is slightly different, is the communities and the people and in that society feel they want to live a certain way and that they meet the law along the way. So that truck, I don't know if it was privatized or local government, but that truck's providing the service, but everyone around there is cleaning up. So you've got a system. And societies have to make up their minds if they are looking after what we used to call the Commonwealth, if we have to look after each other. In the Philippines during just after COVID, I asked them how they'd coped, and they said, well, the government didn't do much, but we did. And my tour operator had become a timber merchant in the space of 3 months. He ran a timber merchant business out of his house. When tourists came back, he sold that and he went back to being a tour guide. So there's this agility, there's this commonality of purpose. I don't want to overplay it. This is not heaven. We're not talking about heaven. What we're talking about, I think, is a highly interesting, complex set of examples, all of which are inspirational in perhaps a different way, but with some common themes. And the theme I'm talking about now is social capital, that we trust and respect each other, we treat each other decently. There are big problems in drugs in Cambodia. I went to the port of Sihanoukville, which I gather is a huge trading port, lots of Chinese money there that looks bloody dodgy to me. These are not all, we're not going to Wonderland here. What we're seeing is is countries that lagged Japan. You were talking about Japan earlier. 20 years later, well, we haven't taken off in sub-Saharan Africa. They are showing us that it can be done. You've got to tap into the natural capital, the social capital of your society, and build enough trust and respect and energy in the foundation of people's relationships. On that, you can build a civilization, a society.
Joe Studwell has a fantastic piece of work called How Asia Works. And he too goes in search of what are the ingredients. And he uses A-B prototypes where, A are the countries that have really done well, and B are the countries that have been filled with promise, but have stuttered and stumbled. And he points to a couple of components that I think help us weave the story together here. And amongst others, each of the countries in Southeast Asia that has been successful in their transition happens to start with an agricultural base. And
all agrarian societies, all of them.
And so for all of our
Like
wide-eyed industrial policy ambition, there's a hang on a moment here. It might start more modestly than that. The second aspect that he singles out is individualization of property rights. That this has been an important game changer. And that takes us back to our discussion in video 1 about institutions, where individualization of property rights are an important institution. The third aspect that he singles out that I think is material in this conversation is he references repressive finance. So repressive finance suggests that you've got financial institutions, but they don't give you money, credit for consumption. The credit is for production. And this then starts to feed this enabling environment. So if we take those, are there aspects that you'd add to that, disagree, or is I see that?
No, I can see that in some countries.
Yeah.
And it's very, very effective. A colleague in London at UCL did a study on the Asian models, and she found that the state plays a critical role in economic development through 4 main fiscal policy options. One is they lend money for companies they want to succeed or industries they want to start up, so debt. Number 2, they give them tax breaks. Number 3, they put in equity. Number 4, they make favorable regulations. And what she found is those 4 primary means were used in different ways in every one of the 6 Southeast Asian countries she studied. So absolutely right. It is productive investment in capital, not social welfare. These countries have weak social welfare systems, but at least you are investing in productive capacity, the infrastructure and the institutions we talked about. And we have to say in today's world that technology upgrading and educational institutions have got to be the long-term generators of productive investment.
So if we use those observations, is there a country that stands out for you as that's my favorite, that's the one that's likely to do best?
Well, the ones that fascinated me the most, I would say, is Singapore, which I've been to more times than I've had breakfast, because it is so exceptionally, it's bizarre, but like Dubai, and has been so successful. And it's kind of plateaued a bit now. So that's not that interesting to us in South Africa. What is much more interesting would be Vietnam, Thailand. I went to Cambodia and just saw, again, this simple work ethic. I went to a city called Luang Prabang, which is an ancient capital of a great empire on the Mekong River. And I've been there 3 times now. And the service level and the care and the subtlety of how they do things just was overwhelming. The people relations, the natural interaction. These are great cultures. So I know Laos is not a country many people go to, but Laos and Cambodia really stood out for me for that side of it. Thailand is doing so well now as an industrial manufacturer, and of course China's onshore to Thailand, and others will build factories in Thailand. I just think my point would be each country is different. Each country is largely successful at the 3Xs, 10Xs that we've been talking about. Each one's worth looking at separately, and then maybe there's some common patterns. But I wouldn't drive to find one silver bullet.
One of the things that we're trying to encourage through this series of conversations is for people to go see for yourself.
Go there.
And you've said something here that I think is particularly important, is there's a temptation to imagine that your country's circumstance is unique.
Right.
That, somehow we are special, and therefore we should get a free pass, that we should be given some wings that lift us to a magical place. Yeah. But your observation is each of these countries has got a story. They all come with scars and history.
Sure.
And how they've been able to disentangle themselves from that scarring, and at the same time coordinate critical parts of the thing to produce, I'm using the word twice, a thing.
Right.
And
now that's true. And remember, they have many institutions that are across the region, like ASEAN, which is a very important policy coordinating mechanism. Almost the same as the EU without all the paraphernalia of the parliaments that the EU has. But it plays a very strong coordinating role between these countries. And they have disputes between them and their challenges. But they are a region. I think what's been beautiful about studying it is there's huge variety and yet common success that makes it really, really exciting.
And that sets us up then for the third part of our conversation, which is the so what?
Right, exactly.
Look forward to that, Nick.
Likewise.